non-Christians, or even some that haven't got a lot of time in God's Word, buy into a lot of this. It's a very common thing we see represented in society. So what does the Bible actually say? Well, first of all, if we haven't already done so, we're on our timeline here. We finished up last week the millennial kingdom, and then you can see right after the millennial kingdom ends, there's going to be that rebellion. Satan's going to lead a whole host of humans against God, which will be put down. And then comes the Great White Throne Judgment with one of the most famous, iconic images in all of theology right there, Daniel Hankey's rendering of the Great White Throne. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, those people are cast into the lake of fire, and that leaves us with just the final transition to make into the eternal state, which is the new heavens and the new earth for the redeemed, or again, the lake of fire and eternal torment for the lost. And that's what the last two chapters of Revelation are going to talk about, is this eternal state. Typically, when we make a transition like this, we will spend some time going through the Old Testament, like we did with the millennium, the tribulation, some of the other major time eras, is looking at what the Old Testament says about these periods, these ages. The Old Testament doesn't say much about the eternal state. The New Testament doesn't say much about the eternal state. Whatever that is, that last era of history, as we fade off into eternity, God is keeping that pretty close to his vest. Almost the entirety of our body of knowledge about this final state comes from these last two chapters of Revelation. So that is where we're going to pick up today and spend the next couple of weeks in. So if you have not already turned to Revelation chapter 21, let's go ahead and start in verse 1, and let's read through the first 8 verses, if someone would like to pick up those 8 verses there.
Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. There was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Now the joy of God is with men, and he will live with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain. The old order of things passed away." He who was seated on the throne said, "I am making everything new." Then he said, "Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true." He said to me, "It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To him who is thirsty, I will give drink without cost from the spring of the water of life." Is it 1 through 6?
8, if you would.
He who overcomes will inherit all this, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. But the cowardly, the unbelieving, the vile, the murderers, the sexually immoral, those who practice magic arts, the idolaters, and all liars, their place will be in the fiery lake of burning sulfur. This is the second death.
All right, what do you think? Thoughts, questions, comments?
I've always been curious in verse 4 when it says that he will wipe every tear from their eyes. If there's no crying up there, then why is there tears that he's got to wipe?
What do you guys think?
It's seems like he wipes every tear from their eye. Then, period, there will be no more death or crying or pain. So, it'd be like you wiping your, like, Isaac's eyes and then wipe the tear away, and that's the last tear, and he never cries again.
I wish they would have put the then in there.
That's just a thought.
Yeah, no, I agree. If they would put the then, and maybe that could very well be it, but
Maybe it wasn't,
maybe it was in there.
with all these translations.
Someone's going to have to check the message.
Yeah.
Fact check, right? That's our
I wasn't gonna do that to you, Dan.
There's your Christmas gift.
Yeah, not today.
No, I would certainly agree with Logan there. Mr. Hank, sorry, when I'm in high school, I refer to myself in third person, so just sometimes it's hard to make that switch. It's a long story. Anyway, I. There we go. I've got a drawing on the board behind me. We're going to refer to a lot of people, as we read through the description of heaven, what a lot of people think of as heaven. It's not really heaven. Heaven is mentioned very rarely in the eternal state. In fact, we are apparently not going to be dwelling in heaven. We're going to be in a place called the New Jerusalem. That's where God is. This new city, this New Jerusalem, whatever that is, and these descriptions that we're about to read in the following verses are describing this place called the New Jerusalem, and that's where our attention is going to be. You'll notice I've got it drawn as a cube, so you Star Trek fans, those of you who are familiar with the Borg, you're wondering what's going on. There's a reason for that we'll get to in a little bit. Any questions on the first 8 verses before we pop on and read a little more about this New Jerusalem coming down from heaven?
It's kind of scary in verse 8 when he's like the unbelieving, the vile, and then he ends it with, and all liars. Like, how many people fall into that classification?
See, but I think it's the ones, are we still liars in God's eyes since we're covered by the blood of Christ? Or, have we
And the
been-
sexually immoral, really.
have we been forgiven of these, and so we are no longer in God's eyes that way?
Well, and then Jesus says anyone who thinks, thought about his brother is guilty of committing murder. So he would fall under murderers too then.
I was thinking about that this morning with a man who looks at another woman lustfully commits adultery with her in his heart. I feel like what I maybe realized, maybe I'm wrong, but it's God's way of saying you cannot do this. You need me because you are going to commit adultery in your heart. And so if you are not covered by the blood of Christ, you may not go out and physically commit adultery, but realize that you still have. So it to me was just another way of saying, like the whole Old Testament, you can't do this without the blood of Christ.
Sin is still there.
Yeah, you've got to have it covered. So, me lying to Carter about moving the elf this morning, I don't think I'm going to go live outside of New Jerusalem.
I'm like, sorry. You're gonna complain.
I've been forgiven of that sin. And the elf still hides. Don't watch this, Carter. You're still 4 years old.
Sorry. Logan, I think you're right. That word that in 4 when he says,
You will wipe every tear from her eyes. There will be no more death, no mourning or crying or pain.
yeah, when it says there shall be or there will be, that could be interpreted as what comes to follow will be based on that Greek, so I would have to agree with you. Not that I disagreed with you before, but
Well, and it says the why, like before the former things have passed away. So kind of that.
after all those things. I would agree with Ben too about that. I think the only way we can overcome it, verse 7, the only way is through Christ. That's it. I wish it would say, but he who has is saved by the blood of Christ. That would be good.
Indirectly, it does. In verse 7 it says, the victor, the overcomer will inherit these things. And there's another verse, and I'm sorry, I can't think of it off the top of my head, but it defines what victor means, what overcomer means. There's a verse that says, who is the one who overcomes but the one who believes in the Son of God? So I'll have to find that verse, but there you go. Any other questions, comments on the first 8 verses there?
Just in commenting on that, I think it's really hard for, like, I have family that aren't believers that have read scripture and would still, have gotten through it and, okay, still don't believe this, but then, well, we're all going to hell anyway. Like, would take things out of context, not because they haven't bread at all, but because it didn't mean anything to them, so they would take that and just say, it doesn't matter because we're all going to hell anyway. It's just that reminder of how important it is to not take things out of context, but then how hard it is too when people focus on certain scriptures without looking at the whole thing and.
I have a reference here to Isaiah 25:8, and basically just talk about death, and we're in tears because death has been thrown into the lake of fire.
And then for your reference, 1 John 5:5.
Thank you, I was just getting ready to look that up.
Who is it that overcomes the world? Only he who believes that Jesus is the Son of God. This is the one who came by water and blood, Jesus Christ.
Anyone else? Things to share? Talk about?
I love verse 5. Behold, I'm making all things new.
Oh, that's awesome.
Love that.
Hey, it rhymes. Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. Sense of humor. What do you got for that, Amy?
I was just thinking of what, it doesn't rhyme in the Greek which it was written in, but that's okay.
According to the message, the Greek in the message it does.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. All right, let's move on. Verses 9 through, I think the rest of the chapter. These last few verses 9 through 27 all are describing the city. So let's take a look at that as a whole, 9 through 27.
Then came one of the seven angels who had the 7 bowls full of the 7 last plagues, and spoke to me, saying, Come, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb.
I'm going to interrupt for just a second. Now, at this point, who are we thinking when we hear a bride? In Scripture, who's usually referred to as the bride, the wife of the Lamb?
Normally Jesus. No, the church.
Church, there we go, okay. All right, I'm sorry for interrupting. Please continue.
And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great high mountain, and showed me the holy city Jerusalem coming down out of heaven from God, having the glory of God, its radiance like a most rare jewel, like a jasper, clear as crystal. It had a great high wall with 12 gates, and at the gates 12 angels, and on the gates the names of the 12 tribes of the sons of Israel were inscribed. On the east 3 gates, or were inscribed on the east 3 gates, on the north 3 gates, on the south 3 gates, and on the west 3 gates. And the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and on them were the 12 names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. And the one who spoke with me had a measuring rod of gold to measure the city and its gates and walls. The city lies 4 square, its length the same as its width, and he measured the city with his rod, 12,000 stadia. Its length and width and height are equal. He also measured its wall, 144 cubits by human measurement, which is also an angel's measurement. The wall was built of jasper, while the city was pure gold, clear as glass. The foundations of the wall of the city were adorned with every kind of jewel. The first was jasper, the second sapphire, the third agate, the fourth emerald, the fifth onyx, the sixth carnelian, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the ninth topaz, the 10th chrysoprase, the 11th jacinth, the 12th amethyst. And the 12 gates were 12 pearls, each of the gates made of a single pearl, and the street of the city was pure gold, transparent as glass. And I saw no temple in the city, for its temple is the Lord God, the Almighty, and the Lamb. And the city has no need of sun or moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives it light, and its lamp is the Lamb. By its light will the nations walk, and the kings of the earth will bring their glory into it. And its gates will never be shut by day, and there will be no night there. They will bring into it the glory and the honor of the nations, but nothing unclean will ever enter it, nor anyone who does what is detestable or false, but only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life.
Thank you. So why, if throughout the rest of Scripture, the bride, the wife of the Lamb, is a reference to the church, why do they refer to it as a city here?
because it's a temple in it itself? Because God lives there? So the whole thing is a church
And not only does God live there, but we will be
with,
with him. So I agree that this is our dwelling place. The church is so closely identified with this city that it's referenced as if it were the same. And they did that in the Old Testament too, not with this city, but what city was so closely related to the people of Israel that the Lord spoke of them as the same. Jerusalem. Right, when Jesus was about to finish his earthly ministry and Israel had rejected him, he said, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I long to gather you as a mother hen gathers her chicks under her wing, but she wouldn't have it." He wasn't speaking of the physical city Jerusalem, he was speaking of the people of Israel. That city represented them. There was that close connection and relationship. In the same way, this is our home, this is where we're going to be. And so they're spoken of as being that closely interlinked and related. And there's lots of details here. Who would like to begin?
Well, I've always had a question. What's the significance of the walls and the gates that never close? I mean, why have walls?
Well, it's having a gated community.
A gate that will never close. And so what's the point of
A gate, yeah.
Huh?
Yeah, what's the point of a gate? It's never closed. And why would anybody want to come in and out? And it implies to me that maybe the people from hell see that and they just can't come in, perhaps?
They're cut off. They're not going anywhere. But there is going to be, apparently, as we'll read more of, there is going to be travel back and forth between the New Jerusalems and the earth.
Really?
Yeah. It doesn't specify if there will be between heaven and the New Jerusalem. That's a possibility. The Bible, as far as I am aware, doesn't say whether there will be. But yes, it does specify that people will be able to travel back and forth between the New Jerusalem and earth.
So we still won't live in the third heaven.
Not unless you're a Mormon, no. Sorry, that
So
was...
the angels will
jab.
be in heaven?
Some of them may be. The others are going to be surrounding the presence of God as they've always done in the New Jerusalem. In fact, before I raced on the board, I had that old chestnut about Peter at the gates of heaven. It does say someone's going to be at the gates of heaven, doesn't it? Back in verse, is that 10, 11? No, 12. 12. It's not St. Peter, though. But someone.
There will be angels at the gates.
Yeah, one angel guarding each of the gates. One angel for each gate will be there.
Would this be like the cherubim with the flaming sword at Eden? To keep those out that shouldn't be coming in?
The Bible doesn't specify, but I would say that is probably a pretty good guess.
Don't you think too, like as people, like walls are kind of a sense of a boundary and also safety, even if there's not, like, it's kind of like there's boundary and there's safety and there's still going to be, I think there's still, I don't know, like is there still rules, there's still some structure and just, I don't know. I think that's kind of where my mind goes with that question.
To us, yeah, I agree. It speaks to us of safety and structure and order. But of course, we don't have a lot of experience with literal walls. Those of you who commute to Indianapolis, you don't have to go through a checkpoint, a giant gate or a wall to get there. But you have to understand that we're kind of the exception. Throughout most of human history, major city, especially the major ones, would have walls. So throughout history, all these saints who've lived and died would expect there to be, around any city, a wall. In fact, there was, I forget the quote, but there was a quote. Someone said in antiquity that a city without a wall is no city at all. So how could you expect the greatest city that has ever been or ever will be to be without a wall? To us, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, but again, we're in the minority. Most of the people who have lived in human history would fully expect heaven to have a wall, to show its strength. So that might be a cultural thing there that we just don't get because we don't have walls, but most people would expect that.
Just tossing out another idea, maybe too practical, but walls also keep heat in and keep us warm. So maybe there's still walls so that to keep the elements out. So people can live in the city and stay warm inside and not freeze. I don't know. Just-
But don't we not have even a sun anymore because
Yeah.
God's brilliance takes
Doors are
care
gonna be
of all
wide
of
open
that?
on all sides, so.
No sun, no moon, no sea. One of my favorite, and did you notice what the walls were made out of?
The elements.
They're clear. In verse 18, the building material, its wall was jasper, and the city was pure gold like clear glass. Anyone who's seen a lighthouse before, you know how beautiful those are. Imagine that this, right, because God's going to dwell here, there's no temple, this is God's dwelling place, is a giant cube. We read about it, and we'll talk more about that in a second, if we have time. It's a giant cube that's made of clear material, like jasper or diamond, and God's radiance shines out. It is going to be like a sun. And these stones, we're not exactly sure what all the stones are, but they're colored. So imagine this, this great kaleidoscope of light and color, and it is illuminating the entire universe, centered, coming out of the New Jerusalem. It's hard to imagine what that would be like.
How is it pure gold but clear as glass?
We don't know what kind of materials these are. Like I said, the Bible has translated these words. Not all of those materials are known to us. And so it may be a building material that is not known, that is not an earthly building material. So, because on earth, gold is not transparent. This one apparently will be.
Does it say clear as glass or pure as glass?
Mine says pure.
I mean,
Mine's as clear as
in the-
crystal, so.
In the original, is it clear or?
Oh, that's a good question.
Because pure glass wouldn't have any impurities you would be able to see it.
Right, it doesn't mean that it's clear, but.
Yeah, because
That
pure
is
would
just
make sense
pure.
for gold,
Right.
not clear.
Clear. All glass.
Of course, then again, back at, once again, like Dan said, though, that we've also learned that, like, bronze and represents something else sometimes. Like these feet of bronze or things like that, or iron scepter.
The city shimmered like a precious gem, light-filled, pulsing light.
That's the message.
What else could that be?
Thanks for that helpful tip.
That cleared it up.
No pun intended.
Oh, it was fully intended.
The Greek word used is clean, clean. So some translations are making it pure, translating it as pure, and others are translating it as clear.
Just how, if you're using gold as a descriptor, if that's what the word was, I guess clean would imply pure to me.
At any rate, it's gonna be something.
It's gonna be nice.
Even if it's not clear, it's really shiny.
Yeah. So, talk
Don't
to us a
touch
little
it.
bit about this cube, and then I've got a question about why they even say verse 27. We can talk about that later, but the 1,400 miles by the 1,400 miles, and for perspective, that's like Minnesota down to Texas, I believe, on a cube scale.
Well, that's how I spent most of my week, is just playing with the numbers, because that's what I do. It says 12,000 stadia. Stadia, you kind of hear the name stadium in there. That was an actual measurement. The one stadium, so you think like Lucas Oil Stadium, that was one stadium. So, of course, not all stadiums would be exactly the same. The Greek measurements weren't as precise as our meters or feet are today. They're not standardized. But roughly, it's about 14,000 to 15,000 of our miles.
1,400.
Excuse me, 14 to 1,500, you're correct. So if you do the math on that, it turns out to be roughly 3/4 of the land mass of the United States is about, well, I'm using the 1,500 number. 1,500 times 1,500 is 2.25 million. I looked up on the internet and they said the contiguous United States has a surface area of 3 million. So 2.25 compared to 3, that's about 75% of the United States would be covered with just the ground floor. Right, that's just the ground floor. So then I'm thinking, well, if it were 1 story tall, you would have 2.25 million square miles of living space or working space or wherever you're going on. So then I just got curious, how much if we were to slice this into
How
floors,
many layers?
how many layers?
Yeah.
I got it. And again, we have to make some assumptions here, so I'm speculating, I want to be clear on
You didn't
that.
get much sleep this week.
Because it could be that heaven is layered like a giant building and there's floors. It could be completely hollow and people are flying inside. We don't know. We don't know. The volume is fixed. Mathematically, the volume is fixed, but we don't know how it is divvied up inside. So I went under the assumption, and it is an assumption, that what would it be like if it were divided into floors? You know, you're assigned floor 3 in eternity, or you're on how much area would we have?
And how many feet per floor are you talking?
So I assume 10-foot ceilings. We're
Make
a
a little
little
room here.
generous in heaven.
Don't be a weed.
10-foot ceilings. And then I compared it to the
How thick is your floor?
land surface area of the earth. Not just the United States, but the entire earth. Not including the oceans. We threw those out because there will be no sea in heaven. But just at the land mass. And it turns out that the total area that God could pack into the New Jerusalem, if he chose to do that, would be more than the entire land mass of the earth, or 5 earths, or 100.
There's a Martian.
It's actually over 30,000 earths in terms of surface area. It was just under 31,000.
I wondered if there was gonna be enough room for people in there, and I guess based on that, there would be.
Well,
Wow.
but
Then
you're
how
talking
would-
about,
I
you're
mean,
talking
are we
about
gonna
everybody
be-
that's
For
ever
heavenly bodies.
We don't
Right.
know. Are we gonna be?
There are a lot of assumptions, yeah, like,
Thousands of years.
what,
How many earths is it?
31,000,
31,000.
or roughly 31,000.
So that's roughly 700,000
Yeah.
square
Are we gonna
feet.
smell?
One thing.
Area of your entire continent.
Approximately.
But if you think about everybody that's ever lived,
Yeah.
and believers throughout eternity, they all gotta fit in there. Well, that are believers, that are, I mean, there's a lot of people, I'd like to think. So you gotta have all that room.
Well, you gotta think Old Testament. too.
Well, that's what I mean. I mean,
Well, but, okay, so
how many years do you go back? I mean, what's the
Go back to the
earliest
beginning of
time?
time, 6,000, so-called 6,000 years. And how many generations is that? And if you even took the people today, did you do all this math?
And if not, why not?
Why not?
Did you?
There are no definitive records, but what I have heard as a rough estimate is that the number of people who have ever lived on the planet Earth is roughly the same as are currently living now, about 6 billion. So then the total would be about 12, from Adam and Eve to us.
I think that
What do you think, 15%?
Now we're getting into.
Judgmental.
Well, as far as like people that claim that they are Christians, I don't know what
Is, what did you
Are
say?
you asking currently?
15?
Is it
There's probably
across the
more than
entire world?
Oh, right now it's higher than that, is what
Is
they
it?
claim.
Okay.
In the world?
But
But even if you
Yeah.
went with all of that, say you went with 80%. And we know that's high, but if you went with 80%, you'd have plenty of room still. Good news, good news. I'll have enough room for my own bathroom.
that's good news for everybody.
Maybe a whole
No, they said
Yeah,
clean
I
and
think we
pure.
have-
They said clean and pure.
I'll be on the top floor.
No, you
It's
won't.
gonna pass down through everyone.
I would think resurrection bodies, you wouldn't do that.
There's no more death.
It's God,
That is death.
There's no more
That's
death.
Andrew.
Oh, you're pointing.
Dan,
Dan,
has God
no
put
more
his,
beans.
like Jehovah's
Oh.
Witnesses cap on the New Jerusalem?
Yeah, what's the
number
whole,
is that?
what is the Jehovah's Witness cap? What is that again? Is it like,
It's 128,000, right?
Yeah.
144,000.
144,000. When the Jehovah's Witnesses were starting off, they believed themselves to be the 144,000 mentioned in the book of Revelation, which was fine for a young burgeoning cult. The problem is it grew, it eventually surpassed 144,000, and then what do you do with the 144,000 and first member?
It's a raffle.
And so they said that heaven is closed to them and that they don't get to come in. So
They say that now?
they can't not.
So then why would you join the Jehovah's Witness movement if you know you're screwed?
Get a new
Well,
earth.
they don't have the traditional heaven and hell that the Bible teaches. They have, their view would be, if you were not one of the original 144,000, most of which are now dead, you would be on a paradise earth, which itself is not too far removed from what it does say. Remember that the New Jerusalem is just part of God's plan. We also have a new heavens and a new earth. And we haven't got to that yet, but we are going to see that there are still people populating the earth. Now, who is that? Is it, you have your choice, maybe Greg wants to live in the new heavens, and maybe Jamie wants to live on the new earth, and you can choose. Does God say, does he divide it up by group? Like if you're a member of Israel, you have to live on the earth, but if you're a member of the church, you live in heaven. We don't know. We don't know. We know that both of these places are going to be populated, but we don't know exactly how. That's talked about a little bit in chapter 22, but again, there's not a lot of answers there.
I think it's interesting that he has the names of the 12 apostles inscribed on the walls, because like I think of, like we in our humanness, we do that to honor people, and I guess just when I think of God, I think of like that's sharing his glory, and I think of heaven as a spot, place where it's like all glorifying God. So I just found that interesting that he's honoring God. I don't know what it is.
No, it's interesting, because if you jump to 22, they will see his face, his name will be on their foreheads. So, it's, yeah. And that, you also write things on that you claim. But then you can also say, we put it up there to, his name up there to honor them.
And then the stones that the foundation is made out of, those aren't the exact same stones as the ephod, but is there a reference to the ephod?
It could be. Some of them seem to be pointing that way, but I didn't research that enough to say definitively.
There are 8 stones on there that are the same in the ephod, but they're not even in the same order.
I think Jasper was the first one, but beyond that, I'm not certain. Just a couple of things, we're closing in on time, just a couple of things I wanted to point out, and I'll leave the last couple of minutes to you. You hear of the pearly gates, and that's one thing that the world at large got sort of right. They get partial credit. The gates aren't pearly, instead they are, and I'm looking at verse 21 here in particular, they're not pearly gates, they are what?
Pearls.
Single pearls, a single pearl. So maybe it's split down the middle and it opens in that fashion.
Yeah.
Also, when we're going back to the size of this, again, I spent most of my time studying it, so you now have to suffer listening to me talk about the math behind it. I was thinking, even if this New Jerusalem came and landed on the earth, what would happen if you went to the top floor and looked out the window? Because that's 1,500 miles up. And so I got curious, it's like, well, how far do you have to go up a building before, you leave Earth, leave the atmosphere and you're in outer space? Is that a thing? And so I Googled this, and Wikipedia, so take it for what it's worth. They said, well, there's no clear boundary. It's typically taken to be about 62 miles. About 62 miles. This is 1,500 miles.
So it's taller than the Earth by big.
Yeah.
Well,
To get to space.
To get to outer space, you have to go 62 miles
Not
up.
taller than the Earth, because the Earth's diameter is more than 1,500.
So you are now a measurable percentage of the way to the moon at this point. It's I looked at it, it's like 3 or 4% of the way to the moon. At that point, you are in outer space.
What is the diameter of
It's
the
gonna be
Earth?
a fast elevator.
6.3 times
Maybe there's
76
only stairs.
meters.
7,000.
We're going to be in good shape in heaven.
floor, guy, please. So you wouldn't necessarily be going to the moon, because if it was kind of here, if it was next to the Earth, so it's
There is no moon anymore. There is no moon. That's true.
What's that?
There is no moon.
Yeah.
So
Please
it's
tell me
a
the
big
math
point.
geeks are in the room.
I'm sorry.
So basically, all of the rest of God's creation is nullified. You don't need the other stars, any other planets that go around the other stars, or any of the planets in our own solar system. God just says, none of that is necessary anymore. There's Earth, there's Jerusalem, there's heaven, and that's it.
It doesn't speak as to the other planets and stars. It just says there won't be any sea, any moon, or any sun. The moon and the sun, it specifically says, the reason it doesn't need that, I'm looking at verse 23, it says the city does not need the sun and the moon to shine on it because God's glory illuminates it and its lamp is the Lamb. So they're looking at as light-giving sources, which they are today, won't be necessary. The planets and the stars obviously don't provide us with light in the same way that the moon and the sun do. So there's no reason to think that they would be gone. The Bible simply doesn't say. Judging that the heavens and the earth are going to be recreated, I would assume, and it is an assumption, that they will still be there.
The sun and the moon?
No, the rest of creation. God says, I'm making all things new. He doesn't say I'm getting rid of everything other than the sun and the moon. He remakes them. He remakes them. And because they were part of the original creation before sin entered the world, that's kind of how I see the eternal state, by the way. I see it as a reclamation of Eden. So whatever the world was like before Adam and Eve messed it up, that was God's ultimate wish for us. We're moving back to that. We're moving back to that.
So there are animals.
I would assume that there would be animals, although sadly they are not edible.
Yeah, there is no death. Maybe one of the floors is the vacant floor though.
Maybe they regenerate, you just slap it, cut off a little ribeye.
Verse 26, the glory and honor of the nations will be brought into it. That, so are we gonna have, okay, America, you did these great things, Africa, you did these great things, am I thinking about that right? The glory and the honor of the nations will be brought into it.
And if we remember what
Region of
just
Africa.
ended,
Africa's not a country.
Yeah.
although by then maybe it is, maybe they'll have conglomerated, maybe that'll be one of the,
Never been to Africa, I doubt it. It's the problem with Africa, is they're tribal.
the millennial kingdom has just ended, but there are still nations during this time period. There's still rulers and kings and authorities. In fact, we will be ruling there as well. And so this is just rolling over into the eternal state. There's no reason to believe those nations have gone away. And so there will be kings and rulers and nations without sin. It's interesting because, of course, Adam and Eve screwed up so early. What would have happened if they had not? Would there still have been nations in Eden? Would we have divided into countries in a perfect society? The answer apparently is yes, because it does say there will be nations and kings during the eternal state.
So it's not like nations as we know today.
It will be, without sin. But yes, they'll be on the earth. This is a carryover from the millennial kingdom. God just sort of rolls the millennial kingdom into the eternal state. And all the nations who did not rebel, who were true to God, are still on the earth, and they will have free travel back and forth between the earth and the New Jerusalem.
So it's the United States, say.
Well, if the United States survives,
Obama. I'm just kidding. I helped Scott out.
then it could be, but again, we don't know the.
So why would we still have kings and countries though? Because if you have no sin, and there is no death,
Need no judgment.
what's the point?
And then think about.
Like, what are
kings
you
and
what
rulers
are you
without
dividing over? You know what I mean?
sin. Kings and rulers without sin.
We still have, and I'm just speculating here.
You're still paper pushers. People like me gotta be around.
Gotta give you something to do. You know what I mean though?
The
'Cause-
original nations were all family groups.
So
So at the heart of what a nation is, or a tribe, it is an extended family living together. And I would see it kind of in that spirit.
See,
Well, I think going back to
I was kind of thinking kind of like the Olympics, where it says all the glory of the nations is brought in there, brought into it. Like with the Olympics, everybody sends their best to the Olympics, and so yeah, you can kind of against. There's still family groups, and you can send your best into New Jerusalem, and you still probably have to have someone say, no, this is the best our nation can have, and so probably there would still be somebody ruling over it, but that's
What were you
just
gonna say, Greg?
Oh, I was thinking about Abraham when God promised to make a nation. It's the nation of Abraham. It's not necessarily a country boundary, but the people. No.
And then you have the 12 tribes.
Well, I was thinking, I was thinking about a question that's been bugging me forever. There seems to be a great emphasis on the 12 tribes and the 12 gates, and everything's in 12s. And so is it our call to understand which, if we want to go there, is it our call to find out what tribe we should?
What gate to go into?
There's an obvious importance for the tribes of the gates.
How do you know what to walk into?
I have a comment about the gates that,
don't know if Dean will remember this, but
Down
in
Middle
our,
Western Gate,
yes,
there.
our high school youth group, when John Arvin was leading it, he talked about the gates, and we even had a shirt that said, "See at the Middle Western Gate," so that's where, year 2000 Plainfield Christian Church youth group will be. But hopefully there'll be directional signs.
That's awesome.
So is there a certain gate we have to use, or are we free to come and go if they're in the gate?
Are we supposed to know which gate? I mean, there's.
That is a great question. It's one of those I don't think the Bible answers. We'll know when we get there, is this the best
Yes,
answer.
I get worried about that.
If they tell you you're gonna get-
Because I'm like, it'll all be.
You know you've made a mistake.
It's
not gonna work out well.
If we have jobs in heaven, you're gonna be in trouble, because if there's no death, there's no chickens.
There can still be sweet tea though. A river of sweet tea on the 34th floor.
So next week, last chapter?
Next week, first of all, thank you very much. I know this has been a long study. I hope it's been beneficial, and I wanted to thank everyone for sticking with it to the end here. And it is the end next week as we look at 22. If you've not already read it, would you please do so? And as you're reading, I think you're going to notice a lot of similarities between this final we call heaven, which is more properly the New Jerusalem, and Eden. So just keep that in your mind as you're reading it and studying chapter 22 this week. Anybody like to close?